ready to pour. As you can see, this mix flows very nicely into and through the reinforcing mesh. We're going to try to get it all out here. You may want to have a pair of gloves handy in your toolbox. And what we want to do is get this mix right into the edges. You can see how it flows. This is a very nice, friendly mix to work with. It doesn't have any gravel in it or aggregates to cause any, what we call, well, they're air pockets when you take those forms off. So we're going to work it around here with the float. And then we're going to take our countertop screed and basically level it off a few times. Go over to back and forth fashion, and we'll get a nice flat finish. Once you get this section done, we're gonna go over this a couple times. We're gonna go over it at a 45 this way, a 45 this way, and then we're gonna flatten it out one more time this way. But right now, we've got to pour another section. You can see how it flows right through that reinforcing mesh beautifully. Sometimes it's handy to have a margin trowel with you, and basically a tool like this to help you clean out the buckets. Helps you clean your tools as well. Let's go. This is a real friendly mix to work with, as you can see. Now this is a little bit low up here, so I'm gonna spread a little bit more up in this corner, as we want to get it right to the top of the forms. At this point, we need to vibrate the forms a little bit to get rid of all the air pockets or any air that may be trapped in there. So we're just going to take our margin trowel and tap it. Don't be afraid to tap it, but this is going to get rid of any air pockets that you may see. You see the air pockets popping up here in the surface? Right there. You don't want to see those on the outer surface when you take this form off. So we're going to tap it. Good. And we're going to do a section at a time. Maybe we're going to come out here 2 feet. And remember where you left off. You could actually mark it if you want, but something like that. So we did 2 feet here. We did this side. Now we're going to come down 2 feet down this side. That should pretty much get rid of all those air pockets. Now we want to take our screed and continue the process, moving all this concrete along, placing it in the forms as level as we can possibly get it. There's a 45-degree angle this way. Pull it right off. Don't be afraid to pull it right off. 45-degree angle this way. Make sure that the that the screed touches both sides of the forms at all times when screeding. Now we'll come across it straight. Now if you have some areas that are a little bit low, as you can see right here, you're going to want to fill them in a little bit. Just pick up a little bit of the mix and splash it in there along the edge. It takes a little bit of fine tuning, but I'm sure that everyone can get this. And we have a little bit of time to work with this, so as we're placing it, we'll come back and do some more fine tuning. And we're ready for some more. Very flowable mix. You can't really see the acrylic fibers, the reinforcement that's in there, but the mix is reinforced with acrylic fibers. Kind of like baking a cake. Got some more in there? That's probably plenty. Just hang on, hang loose. You want to be careful that you don't put too much in there, or you'll actually have to, you may have to take some out, which is very common. Which may be what we did here. Okay, we got a little bit too much in the mix, or in the countertop, so we're going to take some out. Now we have to go back along the edge. We vibrated the first 2 feet, don't forget, so we're going to start back there where we left off, and we're going to vibrate and tap them, maybe another 2 feet. So you kind of just eyeball 2 feet along the edge. Remember where you left off. We're going to do the other side. Get all those air bubbles away from the edge, from your finish edge. And now we're going to go back and we're going to fine tune the edges anywhere where it may be low and you need some additional mix to fill in. To bring it up even with the top. Keeping the screed touching on that side of the form, the top of that form, and this form. And as you can see, it's nice and flat in the middle. We need a little bit more over here. A little bit right here. See a little in this corner. The edges seem to want to pull away a little bit, so sometimes you may have to just flatten them out with a margin trowel, or sometimes it's a good idea to not start the screed right on the edge. Take it 2 or 3 inches away from the edge. Once you get the edge where you need it, once you get the edge nice and right up to the top of the forms, don't take the screed all the way to the edge and pull it again. Start about 4 inches in. And it won't pull it away from the edges. And you could take as much as you need and continue the process. And don't forget, now we have to do the edges. It's real important to keep those edges vibrated so you don't end up with air pockets. And you want to do it, you want to do the vibrating before you screed it. So we came about 4 feet here. We have a little bit more to go. Make sure the corners, you get the corners good as well, so that the mix goes right down in every nook and cranny that it has to be. That's that side. And we'll do this edge. And a little bit up on this other edge. Got a little bit of mix on the outside of the form here. Our edges should be vibrated very well right now. Go back now. We're going to finish screeding. It's a good idea to make sure that your floors and cabinets are properly protected with plastic, and what we used here is we taped rosin paper to the floor. So if you do have a spill, it's not going to damage anything. We're just working this right off into the pail with the screed. We're basically finishing the pour right now. We'll just clean this up a little bit. Didn't spill too much on the floor. And it's a good idea to keep a pail with a little bit in it for going back and filling in as you need it. We're going to check the countertop now, the concrete, and see if it's ready to float off. And if you can touch it and just leave a fingerprint without sinking in too much, it may be ready to float off. So we'll take our magnesium float. We may be a little early here, but it's better early than too late. And we're just going to kind of want to smooth it all off, fill in the low spots, and flatten it out. So we're going to flatten it out with the float. As you can see, we have a little spot right there that needs to be gone over and filled in. And the steel trowel will fill some of those parts in. But the float is your first step in getting the surface flat and level. And this is basically how the magnesium float will leave the finish. It gets it nice and smooth, but it's not completely finished. As you can see, it glides across the concrete very easily. That's floated off. And we're going to let this set now for a little bit until it's ready to finish. It's going to have to get a little harder, actually pretty hard, before we're ready for the steel trowel. But that's how it should look when you're finished floating with the magnesium float. Our countertop mix is now set where we're going to apply the steel trowel finish. And as you can see, I'm touching it and it's barely leaving a fingerprint. And that's where it needs to be when you're ready to steel trowel it. Now, if you're doing a large area, you wouldn't want to wait this long to finish it. You'd probably want to get on it a little bit early. But you can see the surface, how the surface was floated off and how the float left it. Now you'll see how the steel trowel will flatten it out even more. You'll want to take some half round strokes. And if you notice, I'm keeping the trowel about 1/4 inch off of the surface so that it doesn't drag or it doesn't chip up the concrete that's there. You never want to you want to make sure that it's always a little bit, 1/4 inch to even a 1/2 inch. The harder it gets, the more you'll pick it up. But 1/4 inch right now is good. It gives you a nice flat surface, as you can see. And I'm applying a little bit of pressure to this trowel. It's not just gliding across the surface, I'm applying some pressure to it. And when I go off the edge, if you notice, I'm not stopping here and dragging concrete back. I'm going right off the edge. That's how you want to finish your edges. You don't want to pull back any of that concrete and leave a void along the edge. And when using the steel trowel, you can stay away from the edge just like we did with the float. You don't have to go on top of the form. You get as close to the edge as you can and apply pressure to the trowel as needed. For instance, you may want to put a little pressure to the front of the trowel here to get along the edge. Go right along the edge. And off. We're going to let this set a little bit more. And we'll get it even more polished. We'll get an even more polished finish when it sets a little bit more. So that's your initial finish, and we're going to let it set and come back to it maybe 10 minutes. You'll notice that there's some concrete on the top edge of this form, and that's nothing to worry about right now because you're going to want to sand that off with a gem pad before you strip the forms. So don't worry about any of that mess that's made on top of the form. But we're almost finished here. When you hear this noise, you know the concrete is ready for final finishing. That noise right there. This is a very important thing to remember when you're at the last step. Make sure your trowel is off the surface at an angle so that it doesn't dig in to the concrete, because if it digs in now, it's going to be very difficult to repair. And I always like to keep a damp towel handy at this stage and keep the edges of my trowel nice and clean so there are no pieces of dried concrete to get under the trowel and possibly scratch the surface. You can hear that surface is dry because we are very near completion. Once over, and this top is done.
All right, it's day 2, and today we're going to reveal our edge. If you remember yesterday when Leo was finishing the top, he got some excess concrete that came over the top of our profile form. Well, today what we're going to do is we're going to sand that off using the gem pad. The reason why we want to sand it off, if we leave that concrete hang over and try to peel this edge off, there's a possibility that that concrete could chip back onto the top. So we're just going to use our gem pad, which comes with 3 different grits. It's all diamond sandpaper. We have a 60 grit, a 150 grit, and a 300 grit. What's nice about these gem pads too, you can see they're very flexible and they stick on the sanding block. Today, to remove this excess concrete, we're going to start off with the 150 grit. That usually seems to work nice. You want to carefully sand off all this excess concrete that's on top of the edge profile here. And again, this is to prevent it from chipping backwards. Okay, you could see now that we have the top of the profile form fully exposed. You could see 100% of the top of that form. This is now ready to be removed. All right, with a putty knife, we're going to carefully separate the form from the concrete. You'll see it should come right away pretty easy. Then you want to loosen it up, get it started. See, okay, it came off. You can see we have a beautiful edge here. There's a few holes, which is common. It's almost impossible to get that filled 100%, but before we finish the top here, we're going to take some of our counter patch, fill those in, and lightly sand it, and this will be a perfect edge. Okay, I'm going to reveal this edge here. Nice edge. Few holes here that we'll fill with our counter patch and sand that, but you can see we have a beautiful profile on that. There we go. Beautiful. That's a nice edge. All right, once the edges are revealed, you see there's sharp corners there, obviously. So we put the 300 grit paper on, and we're just going to easily round these corners. You want to be very careful sanding these edges, and start with the 300 paper because usually that's good enough to get these just rounded a tiny bit. Just want to take that sharp edge off. Now you could see some of these little pinholes in here into larger holes. A lot of people like that look. They want to leave those holes there. It's a real natural looking look. Personally, I like them filled. So before we finish this, I'm going to use some Z Counter patch. We're going to fill all these little pinholes to basically give it a perfect finish. We don't want any holes left in our finish. You can see the bottom of the form is like glass. It's perfectly smooth. But as you come up, there's more spots in the form that it's going to trap air. So it is common to have these little holes like that. The hardest form to use is the double fancy form because it does leave the most spots in the form, in the profile of the form that will trap air as the air is working its way up out of the concrete. If you're looking for an easier form to use and still get almost the same look, the fancy is much easier. It just doesn't have this second reveal in it. And all the other forms are very easy to use. You'll hardly get any air in them at all trapped. But again, this gives you probably the nicest look out of all our edges.